Hello everyone, my name is Dosblop and welcome back to the Smokey scale. Today I'll be doing a re-review of Joji Smithereens album which released in November 2022. Opposed to the first review I did of this album, this review will not feature segments for each specific track, giving each one a rating on replayability and sound, and will instead be a complete yap fest of me explaining, or at least trying to explain, what I feel about this album. So anyways, let's get into it. Smithereens is the last project Joji released and is his third album in his discography. However, it's also the most controversial one as well, for a variety of reasons. Given the 9-song tracklist spanning a total of under 30 minutes long, a slew of songs that feature no songwriting or production credits from Joji himself, and a lack of what seemed to be a growth of maturity as a serious artist like what was in his previous album, Nectar, are just a few of many complaints that listeners took to this project. Personally, for me though, I find nothing but joy whenever I listen to this album ever since it came out nearly 3 years ago. Something about the vibe that it presents with its production creates a cohesive work of art that is just pleasant to listen to for me. The album begins with Glimpse of Us, the album's hit single, which has almost amassed nearly 1.5 billion streams on Spotify, is rightfully the most popular song lyrically, having the most substance out of all the material on Smithereens, and it being a better ballad than anything on his debut album Ballads 1, besides maybe Slow Dancing in the Dark. Production is also something we haven't seen from him, as typically his production stems around lo-fi production encasing around the R&B and hip-hop genres, or when 88 Rising is involved, mostly from pop genres. The production here is pretty much just piano, with Joji doing a lot of vocal work to make the song be what it is today. Feeling Like the End, the second track, while being shortest song on the album being around 1 minute and 42 seconds in length, is a nice vibey interlude type song that is very encompassing of the production that we are used to with Joji albums, but its sound surprisingly delivers well in between the piano ballad, which is Glimpse of Us, to the third track, Die For You, which if you were to make a lo-fi song that sounds like almost everything else, this would be it. But something about this song feels so much higher budget than most of those other generic lo-fi vibes, and we've all heard 1,000 times on YouTube. The way Joji's vocals melt with this song's luscious lo-fi production feels so cinematic, like something you might hear in a movie, alongside his very obvious melody, which sounds good underneath all the layers. Something about Die For You is just so addicting to listen to, honestly, more than any of the other tracks on this album. Originally I had said Glimpse of Us was my favorite track, but re-listening to this album and this specific song so many times has made me realize that maybe this is actually the best song on the album, despite the amount of people that might say otherwise. Before the Day Is Over is the fourth track on Smithereens, and is yet another piano-y but simple lo-fi vibe. The vocal sample in the background that begins at the very beginning makes the song. What really makes this song work for me is the chorus and the bridge of the song, which just makes the vibe it's going for so much more well executed. Alongside the lyrics being of desperation, it really makes the thematics of the past 3 songs before this one make the experience so much more cohesive, leading into the 5th and final track of Disc 1, which is Dissolve. Dissolve is a pretty odd track, not just because of the almost weirdly experimental auto-tune through the entire track, which on first listen just doesn't seem to fit with the rest of the production, which is mainly a lo-fi guitar ballad with some synths running in the background that almost makes it seem like a sister track to Nectar's Upgrade, which while that song didn't use a full-on acoustic guitar, it did feature a ukulele and was actually one of the first songs Joji did ever produce. Track placement wise, it does work as an ending to the first disc, signaling a move of acceptance from the desperation that we've heard from the previous 4 songs. Into the second disc, we begin with the 6th track, Night Rider, which is a very obvious turn in direction in terms of both production and lyricism, as we've now landed into trap drive production in a song that honestly would benefit from having some sort of feature from a rapper. One rapper I had in mind which could fit on this is actually one of Joji's label mates and friends, Rich Brian, who I felt would have fit perfectly after the second chorus, wherein the song is just a break into the end of the song. If you want a sum up of the lyrics of the song, it's basically just about wanting or getting head from a girl, but sung beautifully, of course, because it's Joji. If you think the antics of Filthy Frank are dead, then you are very mistaken, especially after all the content from his company, Plum Corp Records, that we got in 2023 and 2024, with Dracula Flow and such. Overall though, the switch up from Dissolve into Knight Rider is something I'll always appreciate, and a track like this I think was necessary in the project and makes it way better than it'd be without. Now Blah 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 Demo is the only track here that I have any sort of serious problem with. While the vibe fits with the rest of the album, this song is such a nothing burger of a song and should not have been on this album. After the explosive debut of Nectar, we got a 9-track album with a full demo track being on it. Remove this song and the album would genuinely be completely perfect. Moving on to the 8th track, aka Yukon, which also weirdly happens to be an interlude despite being structured like a proper song and being longer than at least 2 songs which aren't titled as such either. Yukon is yet another drive vibe type song. This song works well in its tracklist placement as it does sound very much like an almost at the end type track. This interlude ends into the 9th track, which is the final track of disc 2 and of the album, 1am Freestyle, which speaking purely is the sort of direction I'm hoping Joji's next album to be leaning forward into, unless he decides to take an experimental route, which I honestly doubt will ever happen. Being very reminiscent of some of the songs off James Blake's album Friends That Break Your Heart, where a few of the songs at the start of that album featured James putting his heart out on vocals where there's just nothing behind them besides some reverb. Parts in songs like these make them sound way more complete and complex, and hearing their isolated vocals like that sounds very good in the case of 1am Freestyle, where Joji's vocals sound absolutely beautiful singing I Don't Want to Be Alone. Ending the album off, it's clear to see why Smithereens is one of my favorite albums of all time, and why I personally see it as Joji's best album so far. Everything this album does well, it does really well, and while I think the second disc suffers a bit from a lack of focus and execution, the first disc includes the best handful of tracks this album has to offer. The real meat and potatoes where its production and songwriting mesh well into such a cohesive project that even its second part mends well into desperation and acceptance that this album delves deep into from the beginning. Songs like Glimpse of Us and Die For You offer such beautiful soundscapes for the listener to experience that re-listening to this album on and on again and understanding its golden vibe feels more rewarding than just throwing it to the side because of first listening issues, because you refuse to acknowledge its pros or don't understand yet what this album encapsulates and brings as a cohesive, luscious, fleshed out universe of an experience. I love this album so much because it really just sounds like an audible movie with some of the highest production I've heard in Joji's entire catalog. It also makes it feel like this is Joji's own journey to be led on, with no features despite songwriting credits from himself not being on the main course of the experience. It still brings itself into a piece that I can nearly say is perfect, and that's why I'm a fan of Joji, and that's why I'm going to be excited for his next release, whether it be this year, the year of 2026, or in theory 3 years from now. This really feels like the essential project to recommend from him besides Nectar, of course. The new reloaded score for Joji's Smithereens album gets a 90% on the Smokey scale, 10% increase from the original score of 80%. Anyways, that's about it. See ya.